We'll just start off just by talking about what you were doing musically prior to Hayseed Dixie.
Man, that was 20 years ago. I have a hard time remembering last night. um, I don't know. I was running a recording studio in Nashville, Tennessee, and playing as a side guy for various different people. I didn't have any particular bands of note or anything before Hayseed Dixie. I was 30 when that one started, 30 years old. So I'd been to college. I'd spent a long time playing in fraternity party bands and various different country groups and that kind of thing. But yeah, the Hayseed Dixie project was the first one that I did on my own that had any kind of success that's measurable. Quite by accident, really. I didn't ever expect it to. I thought it was a record the first record that was done was all sort of AC/DC songs done in a hillbilly style, and I thought it was going to be something that people would just play at their party and their barbecue or whatever. Maybe it would be a little bit of an underground sort of record that might give some people some smiles at like I say in their backyard or something. But I never thought it would turn into a career. And 20 years later, 15 albums of the stuff, and here we are touring again. So, I've been as surprised by it as anybody else, I think.
In hindsight, do you think that's probably the best possible way to start the band, to not go in it with any long-term plan the way you did?
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, I think sometimes we spend too much time trying to figure out how to calculate all the variables, how to control everything, and that's not the way that life normally works. I mean, most of the interesting things that have happened to me in my life have all been the results of just kind of following my nose on a bit of a whim or an accident. None of the things that have happened to be significant in my sort of I'm almost 50 years old, and in my sort of 50 years of living, I can't remember too many times when I could really control all the variables. Most of the time it was more the result of just kind of, like I say, following my nose on a bit of a whim and seeing where you end up and walking through the doors that open instead of sitting there banging your heads on doors that don't. So yeah, I suppose we really don't have a lot of choice about that. Really, it's kind of surprising where you end up after a while of just sort of following your nose. Yeah, how much you can really plan and control, I don't know. Not that much, maybe.
Yeah, I believe you have a master's degree in philosophy. Is that right?
That's a long time ago, but yeah, way back in a different life. I did spend a lot of time studying German philosophy. I'm not quite sure what I got out of it, other than maybe the confidence to read contracts.
Yeah.
Never hired a lawyer. Well, I mean, most contracts are pretty easy. They're just an if this, then this kind of a logic argument. So yeah, whenever we've had record labels or whatever, they've thrown these big contracts in our face, and you can hire a lawyer if you want. And I'll say, well, I think I can read, man. It's one of the funnier contracts I ever had tossed at me, which I'm told is fairly standard. But we've mostly worked with independent labels our whole career. We haven't spent very much time at all dealing with major labels. And today, I'm not sure that means very much, because the music industry's changed so much now that, unless you think you're going to be the next Taylor Swift or something, there's not really any point in being on a major label. But back in the day, 20 years ago, one of the subsidiaries of Sony wanted to sign us. That's the first record. The first record that we did was pretty successful in America and in Australia too, actually. Mm-hmm. So we got all this interest from these record companies that would have never talked to me before. And I remember reading through the contract, and one of the clauses said territory, like where in the world or whatever the contract was going to be enforced, the territory of the contract. And it said this contract shall apply in this world and all others, including those not yet known and or discovered. And I said, wait a minute here, Hoss, does this mean that, if in the event that we colonize a planet that's orbiting Alpha Centauri, that you're going to own the master of the record there too? And the guy said, well, it's just legalese, And I said, well, if it's just legalese, why don't we strike it out? He said, oh, we can't strike it, he says. I said, well, okay, if you take it seriously, that means I need to take it seriously. This is bullshit. He's like, well, it is a standard contract, so I can't believe anybody would sign something like this. That's ridiculous. You know? So maybe going to school and studying philosophy gave me the confidence to sit there with record label executives and say that kind of stuff. And just go, I don't care what everybody else is signing, man. This is dumb. I can't believe anybody would sign this. Yeah, I remember the record label that we did our first record in Australia with was called Festival Mushroom. I think they're long since swallowed up by Warner Brothers, but they were lovely people. They were based in Melbourne.
Yes, they were, yeah.
And it was the first time that I ever really experienced a particularly concerted promotional push by a record label. That was the first time we'd ever been outside of the United States, other than to go to Canada, which I suppose does count as a separate country, but you don't have to fly to it, so it didn't quite feel like going to a different country to us at the time. It is a real border, and I say this to people in Europe who are talking about the Brexit thing and saying, oh, we should just use the Canadian model as a bit of a example of how to deal with it. And I say, man, have y'all ever crossed the Canadian border? I mean, that's a real border, man. They don't mess around. It's a proper customs border. I mean, every musician I know has got some horror stories about crossing from the U.S. into Canada and the other direction. I mean, when you come back to the U.S. side, basically, you know, sift you through a sieve as well. I mean, it's not a joke. You have to Con A everything or manifest it or whatever you want to call it. Put a list of every single thing that you have in your vehicle and declare a value on it, serial numbers and all this kind of stuff. I mean, we'd keep our used strings whenever we cross the Canadian border and come back, because if you went up there with 6 sets of guitar strings and came back with 4, they would try to charge you duties on it as if you'd sold 2 sets while you were there. Oh, so you keep your used ones. Oh yeah, that's a customs border. You know, people who don't realize what it is don't understand. Every single thing has to be accounted for, you know. So why they would want to do that between the UK and the rest of Europe, I simply don't understand. I mean, nobody yet has ever told me what a potential upside to that would be. Yeah. We can talk about that later. I don't know. Sovereignty, I suppose, and other such weird ideas in a global world. But anyway, back to Mushroom in Australia. Yeah, that was the first time that we'd really ever experienced a record label sort of throwing everything they had behind something. And we went down there, I guess it would have been the summer of 2003, I think. If I could go back and check, but I think that was when we went the first time. And we played only 2 shows. We played a show in Melbourne and a show in Sydney. I can't remember the name of the place in Sydney, but the place in Melbourne was the Esplanade Hotel. It was a big white building on the beach with a ballroom in it.
Yeah,
I think they were like... Is it still there? Cool, right? Yep. Well, we had 700 people. I don't know. It was at that time, it was the biggest crowd of people we'd ever played to for one of our shows. I mean, we sold a lot of the records in the U.S. a couple of years previous to that, but the U.S. is so big, and it was sort of scattered out amongst a lot of people. So we'd get 300 or 400 people, maybe 500 people at a club show in the U.S. at that point. But we'd never had sort of 800 or whatever it was at the Esplanade. That was kind of the biggest audience we'd ever played to at that point. I think the record sold something like 30,000 copies in Australia, or maybe 28. It was just below whatever a gold record in Australia was at that time. I can't remember what the exact number was, but it was something on that order, because I remember we were all really surprised by it. Like, wow, okay. That was sort of the point that we began to take the whole thing a little more seriously. It's like, maybe this isn't just sort of a bit of a gag. Maybe this is people actually like this. Okay, this is cool.
Well, you guys you were a news story when that album came out. I can distinctly remember seeing it on the evening news.
Maybe, yeah. I do remember doing several TV shows. I don't remember. I mean, this is, like I said, about 2003, and I wasn't seeing it from the Australian side. We were sort of being shuttled around by a rep from the record label, from this radio station to this radio station to this TV station to this TV or newspaper interviewer, and then we were doing phone calls and ISDN link-ups. They really put a promo campaign together. We were down there for about a week. They flew us down there. I mean, we played mostly promotional stuff, but then we did do a couple of proper gigs at the end of it. And yeah, man, that was definitely effective. That was the most effective but promotional campaign that we were ever a part of, I think, really. It kind of became the benchmark against which I measured all others. And I was really sad about a year and a half later when the record label got bought by Warner Brothers, and they basically laid off the entire staff. I mean, there was nobody there I knew anymore, and That was a bummer. That was
Mm.
that was the other side of the coin. Was, oh man, this was a great little label. They were kicking ass. We liked these people, and then it just kind of evaporated. And that sort of we sort of never found a label to replace them in Australia. You know, the Warner Bros. People were nice enough, but we were just kind of a small act to them. We weren't anything of any kind of priority, so we never got that kind of promo buying in Australia again. Having said that, I'm not sure we ever could have. I mean, you can only introduce yourself to a place once. You know, you can't continue to keep going back over and over and having the same novelty or newness or that kind of thing that you had the first time around. So, you know, it's been way too long since we've been down there. It's a long, long flight. It costs a fortune to get around the place. At our level, you don't do Australia because you're trying to make a whole bunch of money. You do it more just because, you know, something interesting to do. That said, that festival that we're doing up near Brisbane is paying us a decent amount of money. They got our plane tickets, so that's kind of what made this possible.
You mentioned the word novelty. Was there ever that danger that you could slip into that category through people's eyes because of all the covers?
Oh, I don't know, man. I mean, probably. But, I mean, most of the bands I like have novelty aspects to them. I mean, you know, how old is Angus Young? 60-something? I mean, he's running around in a schoolboy outfit still. I mean, does that mean he can't play? You know what I'm saying? I mean, does that mean he sucks because he's dressed up as a bit of a character? I don't know. I mean, I've always thought that rock and roll ought to be a show. It ought to be kind of like a piece of musical theater. This whole sort of staring at your shoes and taking yourself really, really seriously, maybe that's part of a particular type of musical theater, you know? I mean, who's Bob Dylan? You know, Robert Zimmerman's the guy's name. I mean, how much have they kind of become the same person after all these years? I don't know. I've never met the man. But, you know, as far as cover songs, I mean, every single symphony orchestra in the world is a cover band.
That's
you know,
true.
Pavarotti, that great cover singer, you know. I mean, most jazz groups, too, do the same thing. I mean, they'll do some originals, but they also do their particular interpretation of the standards, because that's sort of what you're supposed to measure their style by, right? So, I mean, we play some original songs, too. I mean, some of our more well-known ones, actually, at this point, are original ones. The one Keeping Your Poop in a Jar is a particular one that, I mean, Justin Timberlake sang that on the Tonight Show a few years ago. That impressed my daughter. But, yeah, but I mean, you know, yeah, I look at it like the rock songs that we do versions of sort of are for the most part, sort of are the standards of the genre, if you will. I mean, in the same way that Miles Davis or somebody would do takes on jazz standards, we're sort of doing takes on rock standards. And it's not for everybody. I mean, you know, it's not the kind of thing that there's very few acts or musicians or bands or singers or whatever that are for everybody. But I think we are sort of a bit more of a specialist appeal in some ways. But that's fine. I mean, you know, so is what's that stuff you call Vegemite? You know, that's a specialist appeal. You either like it or you don't. You know, not too many people think, yeah, it's all right. I'll eat it if somebody serves it to me. But you know, very few people say that about it, right? It's either, man, I love it, or, geez, that's the most disgusting thing. You know, and that's cool, man. That's kind of what I would prefer people to feel about us, is if they hear something that we've done or they see one of our gigs that they either, you know, really get into it and get excited about it and understand it and kind of participate in it and it resonates with them in some way, or they say, man, that absolutely sucks, you know, I don't want to get that away from me. That's fine, because both of those are strong reactions, and I kind of prefer a strong reaction. I think the worst insult we can ever get is for somebody to watch one of our shows and say, yeah, it was all right, you know, I like what you're trying to do. I mean, you know, that's what we're trying to avoid. So, you know.
Yeah. Of all the songs you've covered, has there been one that's been particularly challenging to put an arrangement together for?
We did a version of a Mozart piece, Eine kleine Nachtmusik, back in like 2010. That one was a bit of a challenge, but more because of the banjo player sort of had in his head that, oh, it's classical music, so therefore it must be really hard to play. And I kept telling him over and over, it's just the same chords, man. It's the same sort of this. We're not talking about something that's, you know, late 20th century, early 21st century. That's really mathematical. I mean, Mozart is, you know, it's lovely melodies and whatnot, but the harmony structure of it it's pretty typical of like what Western pop songs have. It's all the same kind of chord intervals and whatnot. So I had to draw him up a Nashville number chart of it, and then he played it straight down because he was like, "Oh, this is not the a country song, just going by faster." And I said, "Well, yeah, exactly." So that was an interesting one. Trying to do a version of Bohemian Rhapsody, that took a while, mainly just because it took us a while to figure out all the different parts of the song. I mean, there's a lot of parts in that, and you can kind of tell that they didn't sit down and write it all at one time. You can sort of tell it's the type of a song that was written in different pieces and was then kind of assembled later. You wouldn't sit down and write something like that all in one stretch, and it changes keys a couple of times, and that took us a while. We probably spent longer on that one working out the different parts than we did on anything else that we've ever done. But we play it every night now. It's one of the most requested ones, and now it seems quite transparent, but that's after having played it almost every night for 9 years. It's actually quite a complex piece of music. And there's been occasional songs too that we thought would be cool for us to do, but then once we started to try to do them, you realize that there wasn't actually that much of a song there. It was more just kind of a sound or a big riff or something. It's part of why we haven't done very much like rap or hip hop or anything is most of the time that stuff is so beat driven that if you don't have percussion or drum machine or somebody doing just a straight up beat, it's not so built around, for the most part, those songs are not so built around chords and harmony and there being a vocal melody. It's just kind of a more poetry over a beat. So if you don't have percussion in your band, it kind of makes it difficult to do those songs because you can't keep the kind of energy or the kind of groove going that's generated by their samples and whatnot. And the same with some of the kind of more new metal. Is a lot of that stuff doesn't really have chord changes that are very meaningful. It's not built around chord changes. It's built around some riff, and then the vocal is more about screaming than it is about there being an actual melody. So, people will say, "Why don't you do some Slayer songs or something?" I'm like, well, we kind of listened to a few of them, and we thought, once you strip this stuff down to acoustic, there's not much to really keep you listening. I mean, the important part of that band is the kind of wall of energy that they're generating. It's kind of a sonic assault. And that's cool, but that's not something we can really do. I mean, no matter how loud we turn it up, it still sounds like acoustic instruments. It doesn't have the same kind of rumble and roar. So me just kind of screaming the lyrics over the top of playing this riff on acoustic instruments just kind of sounds kind of plinky and takes all the power out of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because the power is generated more by the sound of the band than it is by the way that the songs are composed. There's not actually, in a traditional sort of pop music sense, much of a song there on most of those things. It's just a big riff and a bunch of energy. And I'm not putting that down. That's totally cool, but it makes it very difficult to translate that to a different genre, Whereas if something is song-based, and fundamentally bands like Hayseed Dixie are still in the tradition of things being song-based. I mean, they're really basically a blues rock band, And so the chord structures and stuff on those songs are not that radical, which is the reason that you can translate them to all different instruments,
What about feedback from the artists and bands that you've covered? Is any filtered back to you as to how they felt about you covering their songs?
Yeah, bits. Most everybody's been pretty gracious about it. I mean, the AC/DC guys were real cool about it. But when we put the first record, again, this is like 20 years ago, so I'm having to try to remember it exactly. But I remember Brian, the current singer, was really complimentary about it. It sort of actually quite helped us out because there were a lot of magazines in the States, the Rolling Stones, some of these guys that wrote reviews of the record saying, "Oh, this is sacrilege, this is heresy." They're making fun of this great classic rock band. And we never really intended to make fun of anything other than maybe people's perceptions of genre. That was the point what we were trying to make fun of, was that people tend to think of, not everybody, but some people tend to think of music as having to exist in these kind of Dewey Decibel System library categories or something. We thought it'd be sort of fun to play with the whole notion of genre. So if we were making fun of anything, it was more that than anything else. But he kind of came out and did a bunch of interviews with people. I think they were in the middle of their Stiff Upper Lip tour at that time, I think. So he was doing a bunch of interviews anyway. And he kept talking about our record all the time. We kept seeing it come up in print, he said, "Oh man, this country band from Tennessee's done a bunch of our songs, hillbilly, and this is great. It's made me fall back in love with these songs. I've heard them in a brand new way, and all this kind of thing." He was really, really flattering about it. So we sort of thought, well, cheers, Brian. That's very cool. Because it kind of took a bit of the wind out of the sails of the people that were trying to criticize us.
Yeah.
What could they really say if the guy that was the singer of the band liked it, And let's see, Brian May was pretty flattering of our version of the Bohemian Rhapsody. Gene Simmons, we did a Kiss record in 2003, and I sent him a copy of it just kind of as a courtesy, just hope you like this. And he emailed me back and said, "This is great. I can't wait to get the royalty check." Okay, so Gene's consistent, I thought, okay, he's being his character to the end, But that was cool, yeah. So as far as I'm aware, we haven't had anybody whose song we've done that's been all pissed off about it or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't gotten back to me if they have been. I don't know for a fact, but Robert Plant was real cool about our version of Black Dog. I ran into him at a festival many years ago. Lovely guy, actually. He's one of the nicest kind of big rock stars I think I've ever met. It's hard to be a bigger rock star than Robert Plant, really, but just a really, really cool guy. He was sitting at the catering tent, eating with the guys that were the crew guys and stuff. He wasn't sort of sequestering himself off or anything. He was just kind of hanging around, which is kind of the way that a lot of the people that I've met that have been in the business for a really long time tend to be. They tend to be more just kind of relaxed about everything. It's the guys that have only been doing it for a couple of years who tend to sort of keep themselves off and be real prima donna, with a few exceptions. But for the most part, the cats that I've had the privilege to bump into who are, kind of proper rock stars do tend to actually be just kind of, dudes hanging around with the rest of the crew, But yeah, Trey Cool, the drummer of Green Day, came to our gig in Paris one time. This was many years ago. It was a club show. 500 or 600 people kind of a thing. He bought a ticket. He didn't have to be put on the guest list or anything. As it turned out, I think they had played a show. Green Day had played the Enormo Dome there the night before or something, and they had a day off. And I guess he did what we do sometimes and sort of scanned the newspaper to see what was going on that night instead of just sitting in the hotel. So he came to our show. And yeah, we spent an evening kind of hanging out with him afterwards. He was an interesting dude. For like the next, 4 or 5 years, I once in a while would get an email from him where they'd be in some stadium and he'd say, "Saw a cock on the wall and thought of you," and there'd be like, somebody drawing a dick on the wall with a Sharpie like people do backstage in places. And he would have in a different Sharpie written, "Hayseed Dixie was here around it," or something like that. He'd take a picture of that and email it to me and say, "Yeah, I thought of y'all." He was that kind of guy. So he was cool though. He was a good dude. He was all right.
What about people who would regard themselves as purists, bluegrass purists? How have they responded to the band in general? They've been pretty accepting?
Man, I really couldn't tell you because I don't know too many people like that. And we don't tend to play at those types of events or anything. The closest that we get to it would be like, we've done the Cambridge Folk Festival and the Cropperty one in England, which is like Fairport Conventions Festival. But those are both fairly progressive. You know what I'm saying? They're not. There probably are some purist people at those, and there's probably some people who have heard one or two songs by us and went, "Oh God, whatever," and gone to the beer tent. And that's the perfectly legitimate reaction. It's either your thing or it ain't. But none of those people have come up to me and like thrown a milkshake on me or anything. Maybe they should. I don't know. It might be kind of interesting. I like vanilla, by the way, and it tends to stain less. So if you're into the whole milkshake thing, keep it in the vanilla camp, and I'll be happier. Malted milk ball vanilla, that's a nice flavor. Not much of a strawberry guy. I don't even really like strawberries that much. So I guess if you really want to be nasty, throw a strawberry milkshake on me. I'll try to be gracious. But yeah, I've really not had too many people ever come up and get in my face and go, "Oh, you're a bunch of Judases." Yeah. Also, we've been going for so long at this point now, almost 20 years, that I think most people that come to one of our gigs now kind of know what to expect, at least on some level. Yeah, I don't think there's quite the same shock there used to be, which is kind of sad in a way. I used to really enjoy walking around the stage and looking at people who had this kind of expectation. You could sort of tell they don't quite know what we're about to do. Okay, this is good.
Yeah.
That was sort of fun, you know. Whereas now it's more like people are just kind of hoedowning from the first bar of the song, and you think, well, that's cool too. But there is that kind of the fun of watching people after the second or third song kind of go, okay, I get it. And watching a few of them kind of look disgusted as well. I mean, because I think whether you like our band does have a lot to do with what more to do with what you bring to it than it does to do with what we're actually doing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're not trying to slop through it and be silly and sloppy. I mean, we are trying to be silly to some extent because, hell, life is silly on a fundamental level. It's a bit absurd in some ways. But we're not trying to slot through the songs, you know, real amateurish or anything. That to me wouldn't be very much fun for anybody. And I don't think you would stay for an hour and a half show if all we did was go up and kind of play sloppy versions of songs that you knew. That would probably not be. That wouldn't be a show that would hold my interest. So we try to be musically, you know, competent. I think we are after all these years, at the risk of sounding, you know, arrogant. But I think after all these years of doing it, we are all decent musicians, you know. So hopefully it's a well done professional show, but that doesn't take itself too seriously, but still tries to be good quality, you know.
Do you think it could be done the other way around? Do you think there's an opening there for a rock and roll band to cover bluegrass standards?
We gave that a go in 2003. We made a record called Kerosene Brothers that was essentially doing exactly that. We had banjo and mandolin on it, and then the rest of it was drums, electric guitar, bass. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like that record. It's one of my favorite things we've ever done. Did it sell? Not particularly. I think in the States, part of the problem was that it was a bit too rock and roll for any of the country radio or media, but it was certainly too country-ish for anything rock and roll. You know, we weren't going to get it on rock radio because you're never going to get a banjo on rock radio. I mean, Steve Earle did manage to get mandolin on rock radio in Copperhead Road, and I guess REM did on Losing My Religion. But other than that, you'll hear a little bit of mandolin on some rock records once in a while. Rod Stewart's song Maggie May had mandolin on it. You know, you can kind of sneak that one in now and then. But banjo, I'm struggling. I mean, I think there might be some banjo on a couple of Dave Matthews tunes that did get some play on rock radio. You know, you can kind of push the jam band side of it a little bit, but for the most part, if you got banjo going in a traditional way, it's such a specific sound that you're kind of never going to convince anybody in rock to play that. Yeah. So I think we sort of fell between the gaps with that record. The people I know that like it really like it and say it's the best thing we ever did. I don't know, Kerosene Brothers is what it's called. Go check it out if you want to.
Oh, certainly will.
I was real happy with the record at the time. But, you know, we've made a lot of records, and most of the ones that I thought were sort of more on the artistic side tended to be the ones that didn't have any commercial success. And most of the ones where we were just kind of having some fun and thinking, you know, what would be kind of cool to play while we're drinking beer, or what would some other people who are sitting around a barbecue drinking beer like to listen to? Those tended to be the ones that sold the biggest numbers and the ones that people ask us to play, you know, versions of the songs from, for the most part. That seems to be, from our experience. I can't speak to other groups. There's obviously people who've done really incredibly experimental things and been real successful with it, and bless them. But yeah, I mean, my life has mostly been when I kind of got out of my own way and didn't think about it too much and just sort of did something for fun has been the things that have been more successful, whereas the ones where I made more of an effort and tried to actually kind of craft something are the ones that some people would say, oh man, that's absolutely fantastic. And everybody else went, that's right. So what are you going to do? You know, you shoot in the creek enough times, you're bound to hit a fish sooner or later.
This is true.
We've made 15 or 16 Hayseed Dixie albums at this point, I guess, depending on whether you count the live one. And then several different side project things. I've made a couple solo records. I mean, none of them have been, you know, set the world on fire, but in parts of Western Europe, I mean, where the band's fairly well known, and Hayseed will do 600 or 800 people at a show, I can get 100 or 150 or so at a solo gig, and I'll go out and do a handful of those every couple of years, just because it's sort of really just more because it gives me a chance to play some material that the band can't play in the Hayseed show. I remember the first time I did a run of solo shows, people were saying, "Oh, is this where you bring out your serious side?" I'm like, "Well, no, I don't really have a serious side in that sense. I mean, I'm not going to stare at my shoes and try to tell you about my deep poetic soul or anything. I mean, but if we go out and do the Hayseed show year on year, I basically play the same 25 or 30 songs all year long and not much else, and it gets kind of hard to keep myself kind of feeling fresh about it and interested in it. If you too much repetition. I mean, I don't quite understand how some of these bands like AC/DC can do it. Actually, as far as some of those songs they've been playing for 35 years, you know, and you think that's cool, but man, once you get to that point, there's only so much new material you can actually stick in your show, right? I mean, like if they put a new album out and they do a tour, they're only going to play 2 or 3 songs from the new album, because otherwise they'd be cutting out loads of the standards that everybody's paid to hear, right? You know, you go see AC/DC and they don't play You Shook Me, they don't play Black and Black, and they don't play Hell's Bells, and they don't play Highway to Hell, they don't play TNT, they don't play, you know, I mean, I could sit here and I could riddle down about 15 or 20 songs. If they don't play that one, oh, you're going to feel disappointed, because they've been going that long and they've got that many songs that are standards, which is in itself is a hell of an achievement. But that means that like 3/4 of the set's already pretty much written before they even bother to, you know, to book a bus. You know, they can change the order of them a little, I guess, but they're kind of, you know, they're only going to be able to put 2 or 3 songs from the new album in their show. And that must be kind of frustrating.
Yeah,
I would think. You know, you start feeling like you're a bit more of a reenactor of your band's past glories than you are of anything that you're currently doing. It must, for Angus at this point, sort of feel like he's playing guitar in his own tribute band to some extent. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know him. Brian Johnson and Cliff Williams were the 2 that I met from the band. They were both lovely, lovely guys. But this was, again, about 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Not long after we put the first record out, so I haven't, you know, I didn't like stay buddies with them or anything. But it would have been nice enough, but they had stuff to do, you know. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. You get presented with interesting dilemmas. I mean, on the one hand, it's a cool thing that there are enough people to sort of fill a room that want to hear you play a particular body of material. On the other side, it can be kind of like, well, crap, man. I mean, it limits my ability to do anything else besides this one body of material. But it's a good problem to have, and on balance, I've had a pretty interesting career, mainly because people have turned up and paid to see us play. I mean, we make more from the live shows than we do from the records. So, especially now, especially the last 10 years or so. I mean, the records for the most part are just kind of an advertisement for your show, really. I mean, you get paid a little bit from Spotify streams and that kind of stuff, but it's nothing like what it used to be when people bought, you know, more physical product. But I'm not bitching about that. It is what it is. And you know, technology changes and the world moves on, and you have to sort of adapt to it or not. But yeah, you, as a musician now, unless you're doing massive numbers, unless you're, you know, sort of one of the top 10 people in the world, you're not going to make a living just off recordings now. No. You got to go out and play it live. So
that first album, I believe it only took about 3 days to record. Is that a pace you've maintained through the years with your other albums?
Pretty much. Yeah, the couple of them that we've spent more time on have been the couple that didn't really do so well. So, yeah, we've tried to keep it that way. We tried to keep it pretty fresh, where we don't overthink it too much, and we don't make it too schooled or studied. You know, I think the kind of music that we're trying to achieve is more of a party atmosphere. So if we get it too slick and too crafted, it sort of puts the presentation at odds with the material. So we do try to keep it pretty fresh. I mean, there's been times that we'll be working on trying to record a song, and if we don't get something that's pretty close in the first sort of 20 or 30 minutes, you know, the first 3 or 4 attempts to run through it, then we just say, you know what, today ain't the day, move on to a different song. Maybe we come back to it later, maybe we don't. If we don't get it at the second or third attempt at trying to do it, we'll just say, you know what, this ain't meant to be. Because otherwise, you start to become too too goal oriented. You know, you start the beginning of the song, you're just interested in getting to the end of it successfully, and that's not how you make a fun record. That's how you make a very studied sounding record, you know.
Talk about your live shows. How do you go about getting the right balance between originals and covers in a live show? Is that something you're conscious of when you go out?
It used to be more than now. I mean, we've been doing it for so long now that I don't think about it as much as I used to. In fact, a lot of times we don't even make set lists anymore because they sort of write themselves depending on who's in the audience. We sort of know what songs we're going to start with, and we know what we're going to end with, and there's usually a clock that's visible from the stage, and you know sort of what time you're supposed to stop. But what happens in the middle is a bit more fluid than it was, say, at the beginning, when we used to sort of try to craft everything a bit more just for security than anything else. You know, you don't want to be standing on stage and forget what half your songs were, that kind of thing. Whereas now, no, I mean, we sort of slant the set list quite a bit depending on what people seem to be responding to. And that can really vary night on night. I mean, sometimes you've got a crowd full of a lot of sort of bikers and classic rock looking people. And that said, sometimes they're responding to the more original humorous songs more than they are some of the covers. Or sometimes they're responding more to the straight up rock and roll covers. And, you know, the Sabbath is getting them and all that. And you think, okay, well, this crowd is leaning that way, so we'll slant the stuff more in that direction. But that's kind of what we do. It's as I say, at this point, though, there's also, I don't know, probably 14 or 15 songs out of about 20 to 25 that we can put in a set, depending on how much I talk between the songs, which also has a lot to do with what the people are sort of seeming like. Sometimes they seem to be more, if it's a sit-down audience, they seem to be more receptive usually to hearing more of a storyteller kind of night. You can tell them more jokes and stories in between the songs. If it's a kind of a big, raucous standing crowd, then normally you just plaster them with the music more, because stand there too long telling big stories, it kind of brings down the vibe, you know. Yeah. So you have to kind of try to feel that out too. And sometimes I get it right, and sometimes I don't. But I've done almost 2,000 shows with this band now, so I think normally I'm in the ballpark. But you know, some nights are better than others. But that's one of the fun things about live music, is that it's not exactly the same every single night. You know, if you were to see 2 or 3 different shows of ours on a particular tour, I mean, you'd see some similarities, but you wouldn't see exactly the same show every night. I think that's a good thing, actually.
Yeah. So is there any one song, original or cover, in your set that the audience just won't let you leave the stage until you've done it?
I don't know. That's a good question. I actually don't think so, because so many of the songs that we have covered, we don't like have sort of one big hit. You know, it's not like there's no way Motorhead could get off the stage without playing Ace of Spades, or there's no way that you know, James Taylor can get off the stage without singing Fire and Rain, or something like that. You know, we don't sort of have like 1 or 2 songs that really define us. There are certainly songs that if we didn't play them, I'd get people after the show saying, "Oh man, you didn't play," you know, they'd be disappointed by it. I mean, Keeping Your Poop in the Jar being my original one that we pretty much have to play. I think if we didn't play Highway to Hell, people would bitch. But other than that, I don't know. And I think probably a lot of that's a function of most of the songs that we've covered, most of them, not all of them, but most of the songs that we've covered are all pretty big songs. So, you know, even if you came to a show and we played a majority of songs that we don't normally play, you would still hear quite a few that you knew. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think anybody's ever going to walk out and go, "Oh man, they didn't play anything I recognized." That's not going to happen. No. You know.
And just before I let you go, John, what are your plans after you leave us here in Australia for the rest of the year?
Try to see if our houses are still there. I'm sure our wives will have lists of things for us to do. It's been a pretty busy year this year, so we haven't actually been home that much. And once we get down to Australia, we've got a week and a half in October of doing some stuff in Britain. And I think about a long weekend in the States around a festival, and that's it. So the whole month of September and the whole months of November and December, we're going to be home. So, yeah, all those rooms that the wives wanted painted and all the, can you fix the latch on this door? It's starting to not close properly, and all that kind of stuff. There will be long lists. I just know it.
Domestic duties.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, John, we're looking forward to seeing you. It's been a while, so we're really looking forward to that. And you're playing at the Corner Hotel here in Melbourne. That will be a stand-up raucous crowd. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, okay. I've never played it. I mean, I've seen it for years. I know it's a gig on the circuit. So yeah. Well, we're looking forward to getting back down there. It's been too long. So, man, thanks for taking your time to talk to me and help promote it.
No, thanks to you too. Cheers, John. Have a safe flight over. We'll see you in August.
All right, mate. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.